Hey everybody, it's Tanner Mulvihill. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you who take the time to listen to this show. I've heard from agents all across the state and even across the country who've stumbled across the podcast and become loyal listeners. It's very humbling and I am very grateful. If you felt this show has helped you in some small way, I would be honored if you would join the Virginias for Realtors Facebook group and share the podcast with a friend or two. It makes a big difference and helps spread the word. On this episode, producer Kyle and I sat down to reflect on 100 episodes of the Virginia is for Realtors podcast. I share some of the lessons I've learned interviewing top agents across the state, some of the best tips and tactics that have been shared on the show, and then finally, I get a chance to share my best crazy real estate story. And now, producer Kyle interviews me, Tanner Mulvihill, on the Virginia is for Realtors podcast. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Virginia's for Realtors. I'm pleased to be joined today by myself, but in addition, I have my editor, Kyle, who's going to be asking me the questions. And before we get started, Kyle, I just want to say thank you so much for being part of this 100th episode journey. Looking forward to it, brother.
Thank you for having me on an episode. Thank you for keeping me around for 100 episodes. I'm glad you did the intro. I was a little nervous you're going to make me do it, and I didn't think I could top your intro because you do intros so well.
Well, I appreciate that. Definitely have to bump up the energy, and I do like to make sure that I run by the guest how they would like to be introduced. So for myself, I am Tanner Mulvihill, host of the podcast Virginia's for Realtors and the owner of Bayfield Home Loans. I've been in business now as a loan officer over 20 years and the owner of Bayfield Home Loans since October of 2006. Kyle, can you believe that?
That is a very long time.
It is, man, for sure. But I'm not the host today, so I'm going to let you do your thing. Let's do it.
So before the behind the scenes, before we get into Virginia's for Realtors, let's hear about you, your origin story, everything and anything.
I love the question of being an origin story. So I stumbled into being a loan officer like so many do. And the way I stumbled into being a loan officer is when I left the Marine Corps, I was an intelligence specialist in the Marine Corps. I had a TSSCI clearance. I should have one of those nice, cushy government jobs, you know, intel information, all that good stuff. But went on an interview in the DC area, and it was a Friday afternoon when I was coming back. And anybody that knows the Northern Virginia traffic knows exactly what I'm talking about. It started raining, people started crashing, and it took me probably 3 hours, 4 hours to get back home. And I realized that probably was not the life I was looking for. So I went in to get a burger, and there was a place still there. It's called Patty's Bar and Grill. And next to Patty's Bar and Grill in Stafford, Virginia, there was a mortgage company, and they had a sign on their window, a big bulletin board sign that said loan officers wanted. And I didn't know anything about being a loan officer other than the gentleman that had helped me with my first home. I wasn't sure he did a great job. And it's funny, after interviewing a lot of agents who got into the real estate industry, they didn't feel their agents did a great job for them either. So I decided to throw my resume in there. And the next day I got a phone call. I was brought in for an interview, and I will never forget. And I always tell this story when I'm interviewing new loan officers, that the gentleman sitting across from me said, look, man, you can make $500,000 a year doing this job. And keep in mind, this was 2003. So I'm like, ooh, that's some real money. The only problem is it's commission only. And when people say commission only, that turns off probably 90% of the people that are presented with that situation. But for the listeners of this podcast, it didn't turn them off, and it didn't turn me off. And flash forward to 20 years later, here I am.
So a sign. Gotcha.
A sign got me in.
Wow. That's pretty cool. And what about outside of that, like the Marine Corps?
So when I was in the Marine Corps, I was an intelligence specialist. I made it to the rank of sergeant in 3 years and 4 months, which I was really proud of. What's interesting, the things that I did in the Marine Corps actually served me quite well in the loan officer field. And so, for example, I was used to presenting to up to 1,000 people in the Marine Corps. So it's, getting on stage in front of 1,000 people, it can be a little nerve-wracking for folks. I got good at giving PowerPoint presentations. So when I'm giving presentations to agents, I still have those skills. But I really feel the public speaking part helped me out quite a bit because I was not a confident speaker before I went in the Marine Corps. And I actually told my recruiter that I was looking for a job that would get me talking in front of people. And I thought that was going to be public affairs. But he said, no, if you want to do that, you want to be an intelligence specialist and you have the scores for it. So that's how I went down that road.
Thank you for your service. Such a cool career path you have had.
Yes, indeed. I only remember the good years and I appreciate that. One of the things about this career, I meet such interesting people and what they do. So I think of my good friend like Jason Dillon, who is a Green Beret. And I mean, that guy spent over the time probably 8 years in Afghanistan. Like to be in Afghanistan that much, so he might as well have dual citizenship. I met just some amazing people over the time. I'm grateful for them. And I played my small part, but I definitely enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps.
So how about Bayfield Home Loans? Why don't we go into that a little bit and a little bit too, just because I'm interested in how it is running a business.
Running a business. The good news is that I did have up close and personal because my father owns an insurance agency. So I knew what that life was like. But Bayfield Home Loans started in October of 2006. I had just crossed over 2 years as a loan officer, which allowed me to get my broker's license. And I always wanted to start my own company. So I put together the steps in order to do it. The name Bayfield, in retrospect, I wish I had labeled it more towards military. But at the time when I was in Stafford in 2006, and those agents that are listening and know the market back then, there weren't a lot of VA loans because the loan limits were so low. Nobody was taking a VA loan. Running a business can definitely have its challenges because at the end of the day, the only person you can fire is yourself and you can't actually be fired. And, you have great moments and you have frustrating moments. And I think the biggest thing that gets lost on a lot of people is when you're running your own business is the P&L, profit and loss statement, because things just add up. And the next thing you know, you're like, how am I spending $10,000 a month on stuff? And you really have to keep an eye on that.
I give you credit for doing it all and doing it all for this long.
20 years is a long time and running the company since October of 06. And the people that have been listening as well, they know that shortly after October of 2006, the market tanked and it tanked so hard. So I opened my business at like 3 minutes before the worst time to open a mortgage company.
And go into that a little bit more, just because I might have still been in high school, but I had a little knowledge maybe of what was going on. But just how was that real quick?
Oh, it was catastrophic. And, at the end of the day, there were a lot of loans done at the time that you just never thought that the Ferris wheel was going to end, right? It's just going to go on forever. People will be able to do subprime loans and stated income, no asset loans, no problem. This will just continue forever. And then as it became clear that wasn't going to be the case, then it just started getting really bad. And then you're like, holy cow, there's all these short sales and all these foreclosures. And really, I think the hardest part, besides getting business during that time, was just the fact that if somebody was buying a house, you had a sense in your gut that like they're going to be upside down on this the moment this closes, if they aren't already. And it took a lot to dig out from that. I will say that the doomsday sayers that are like, oh, this market's going to crash too, our current market, I couldn't disagree with that more because the loans are so different. And the interest rates were so low for so long there that it's so much cheaper the folks that got in during that time to own a home than to rent now. So they're not leaving that home. That's why I just think these are totally different markets. And they did fix that portion after the crash of the loans for sure.
So I think that your best question is the bold move. And I think the podcast itself is such a bold move. And I think that going for 100 episodes, which is unheard of, no one gets that far. I think that's very bold. But if you have something else, I'll let you go.
I'm going to kind of top that, though, because I don't think that was my best bold move I've made. So when I started as a loan officer, I realized that I was going to have a way to stand out. Because at the end of the day, whether you're a loan officer, whether you're a realtor, what value do you bring for clients, for others? And you have to figure that part out. So I myself came to the conclusion that if there was a way for me to generate a client that the agent would hopefully stick with me, would give me a shot, keep it going. If like I bring you a client, like we're going to work together on this client. Well, how do you do that? So keep in mind the time frame of 2004 when I came up with this idea. I had never built websites before. I had no idea what I was doing. Again, I was an intelligence specialist in the Marine Corps, but I came up with this idea of like, what if I built a website? And this website would be geared towards generating clients. And so my very first website that I built was called VirginiaOffBaseHousing.com. That's what it was called. And the idea was you're a military client or any client moving to Virginia, and you stumble across the website and you fill out your information, and then we reach out to you, and then ideally I'm going to put you with a real estate agent. You're going to work with me. It's going to be great. Well, as anybody who's worked internet leads know, that your conversion ratio is not 100%, right? It's like, as you've listened to the show, you're familiar, like, if you do 5% on internet leads, you're a rock star, and that's a low end. But I am not kidding you that my very first internet lead I got, Kyle, I called this dude up and I said, "Hi, my name's Tanner Mulvihill. I just got your information off VirginiaOffBaseHousing.com. I was following up to see how I can help." And he goes, "Oh, great." And he was a lieutenant colonel moving to the area. I put him with one of my real estate partners at the time. I did the loan. He did the purchase transaction. And I thought internet leads and this idea was, just amazing. One for one. Look at that. And so I took that idea, because I, again, was in Northern Virginia. I said, what about if I built subdivision websites? So my very first house that I bought was out in Lake of the Woods. And at the time, this is in the 2004 timeframe. So the Stafford area was already just going crazy. I wasn't making a ton of money yet. And I said, we looked out in Lake of the Woods with my ex-wife. Well, there was no information on Lake of the Woods in 2004. So I built lakeofthewoodsrealestate.net. And I said, what's the worst that can happen? And we're going to go, as we go through these questions, I think that's going to be a theme that I want people to listen to, is like, what's the worst that can happen on your decision? And always look for that and go from there. But I said, HOA might shut me down, something like that. Who knows? So I built lakeofthewoodsrealestate.net, and nobody was more surprised than me that it started working. And then I'm like, what other subdivisions are around this area that I could start building? And that's what I did.
That's like ahead of its time, too.
To give people an idea, those that know, there's a website called militarybyowner.com. I'm sure it has 1,000 listings on it right now, probably more, of military folks looking to buy, sell, rent houses, stuff like that. And at the time when I built my Virginia off-base housing website, I think Military by Owner had like 3 houses on it. And I asked the guy if he wanted to partner with me.
Wow.
He said no, but I did make the ask.
Virginia's for Realtors. Great name. Fits perfectly. How'd you come up with it?
I would love to take credit for that, but the honest answer is the ideas that I came up with were awful. And my wife does not like listening to podcasts. I want to put that out there right now. So I love listening to podcasts. My wife's like, all they do is talk. I'm like, yeah, it's a podcast. That's what they do. So anyway, I was telling her my struggles of like, I can't come up with a good name. And she's like, said, well, what's your goal? I said, well, I want to interview realtors and I want to do it all over the state of Virginia. And she goes, why don't you call it Virginia's for Realtors? It's just one of those moments where you're like, that's brilliant. Okay, we're done.
Wow.
And the rest is history. So my wife, in 30 seconds of listening to my problems, gave me the best name of a podcast that you could come up with for what we do. And I'm so grateful that she did.
Now, are you willing to share any of the ones that you came up with that arguably were nowhere as good?
I believe they're on my Facebook page. They were awful. It's like, Tanner Talks to Realtors, just nonsense ones. They were not top notch. Let me put it that way.
Even though you're my boss in a sense, that was pretty bad. Not a good one. Great name. Props to your wife. All right. So let's talk about the goal of the podcast. When you first started, it might have evolved by now and might have changed slightly. I mean, I've been there since day one, which I'm so thankful for and so lucky to have been a part of this. But what was the goal when you first started, though?
I think when I first started the podcast, I had this idea in my mind, right? Like I listened to a lot of podcasts and people have different podcasts about different things. But I said, well, how would I get my name out there in the real estate community? One, but how would I bring value? Because again, in the industry, what is your value proposition? What can you bring for somebody? And I wanted to have a way to be like a little bit different than all my competition. So I was like, you know what, if I can figure out a podcast, because I love listening to them. And I actually had people come on the show. That'd be cool. And if they gave good tips and tactics and motivation for other realtors, that'd be really cool. So that was the goal, to find a way to get people to come on the show, to get people to listen to the show, but get value and start from there.
I think you've accomplished it. And again, that's not just because you're kind of my boss.
I do appreciate that. And it's really been a journey for both of us, but I'd like to dive quickly into how we met. I was trying to come up with this idea of like, okay, I know I need an editor, and go on Fiverr and there's 1,000 different people that edit podcasts. I saw you had no reviews yet. And I'm like, all right, perfect. Let me reach out to this guy and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but based on your reviews, I'm not sure you do either. So are you interested in, working with me on this project? And we took it from there, man.
Yeah. And It's funny because I still think the only review I have is yours.
It's the only one you need.
Since then, I've picked up 3 other clients, and it's all because of you giving me a shot. You've been an example in every single little resume I stuck out there. So very much appreciated for giving me that shot. I don't know if I'd be doing this as much as I am if it wasn't for you. So thank you for that. And just a funny tidbit, I think about this often. I've probably listened to you, I don't know, 100 episodes, minimum 5 hours per episode.
Yeah.
What are we talking? How many hours are we talking here?
I know. I was trying to think about how many days you've put into this, because people don't understand. Like when I do the podcast, it may run for an hour and then you chop it up, but you got to listen to it and take out the ums and all the other stuff to make me sound polished. And boy, that takes a lot of time, Kyle. So props to you, because
you do a great job, and I never take anything out. It's so funny to me because I think we've probably spoken on the phone 4 times, if I'm being generous, maybe 5. But I listen to you every week for hours and hours now. So what's your favorite episode been so far?
I love talking with agents when they give me an idea that I haven't heard before, which is great. But then I love the stories. And for me, what I realized when I would ask people, basically, do you have a weird, funny, scary story? People got a lot of scary stories. And I think for us, probably within our, first 30 episodes, we were able to put together, maybe it was 40, somewhere around there, a Halloween spectacular, as we called it. And we had 4 ghost stories, and then I threw in my little one from the end. But I think that was my favorite episode because it kind of waters the eyes, as I've said before, is like there's just some weird stuff out there if you go into enough houses that happen. And so I would say the Halloween Spectacular is my favorite episode, but I truly appreciate everybody that's come on the show, and I've learned a lot during it.
Yeah, I like that you gave me freedom with that one because I got a little crazy with the sound effects. I don't know what I was doing with that one, but it came out good. Yes. I am keeping track, just so you know.
Oh, I think we'll be able to do one this coming October. I think we'll be good.
How about a memorable story from a realtor?
When Ernie Chamberlain was describing to me that somebody put a tombstone as the backstop to a toilet, I didn't wrap my head around it until he sent me the picture. To me, that was so crazy. Like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? There's the toilet, the back of it, it's mounted to a headstone. I mean, I don't know where you get headstones. And this was like a real headstone, Kyle. So you saw the picture. You know, it wasn't like some Halloween toy headstone. No, this was like large headstone. And I just find that to be very fascinating. I would love a whole episode of where you and I interview the people that did this, who it was, why they decided to do it. Like the backstory on the toilet headstone would probably blow our mind.
It could have been a last wish. Who knows?
Maybe you're right. They're like, I want you to think of me all the time.
So here's a question for you. And again, not saying that there's room for it. What areas do you think the show could improve?
I have been thinking about this because I would truly love if the people that listen to this show on a regular basis would be like, Tanner, you should ask about this. Tanner, you should ask about that. I think that would really benefit people because I have a very good knowledge of the real estate world, but I have my view of it. And I think agents would have a different view potentially. So I would love to hear ideas to improve the show from others that are listening to this. And then also a big thing is agent recommendations, because it's not easy to get somebody to come on the show. And that's why I'm so grateful when they do, because it is kind of putting yourself out there. So if there are people that are like, you know, who you should have on this show is this person. They got a great story. They do a great amount of business. They have great ideas. So number 1 would be questions to help me improve, different ways we can ask things. And number 2 would be, anybody know any guests that would be willing to come on? Love to have them.
I like it. So the last one for this segment, how would you measure the success of the podcast?
For me, measuring the success of the podcast is not necessarily in listening numbers, because we are a niche market. So, you know, it's not like we're going to ever be the Joe Rogan podcast. But for me, measuring success is if I hear from agents that are like, I listen to your show, or somebody told me I listen to your show and they reach out. So I've gotten people that have reached out on the Facebook group, on other areas where they've been like, hey, that was a good episode. That means a lot to me. So that would be the way I measure success.
It's a good answer. I like it. All right. So that wraps up this first segment. Oh, this is exciting. I get to do this. I get to say the break. It's great. In our next segment, we'll be talking about the real estate industry from Tanner's perspective. We'll be right back with Tanner.
Do you love helping clients buy and sell houses, but hate the back-end paperwork? then don't do it. Let my friend Sydney Malone with SMRE Leverage Solutions handle it for you. Sydney handles all the details from contract ratification to closing, including scheduling inspections, verifying contract compliance, coordination between the parties, including those pesky loan officers who don't keep you informed, sending weekly updates, and contingency deadline reminders. If you're ready to stop spending your time on 80% of the business that doesn't make you any money and start focusing on the 20% that does, then give my friend Sydney Malone a call at 757-876-9780. Again, that's 757-876-9780, or just shoot her a text to get the conversation started. Oh, and one last thing. Make sure you tell her Tanner sent you.
Welcome back, everyone. In this segment, as I promised, we're talking about real estate industry. Tanner, first question. What's the biggest misconception people have about realtors?
I think that the biggest misconception people have about real estate agents is the same that they have about loan officers, and that would be that we are all the same. And the funny thing is people view us as commodities. You know, it's like, oh, I could grab a realtor off the shelf. The truth is so far down the road from there. It's like, no, there is a big dividing line between those who do this really well and those that don't. And the public doesn't necessarily know that. So to me, that's the biggest misconception people have.
From listening to the show, it's a lot of work.
It's definitely a tough job. And I think the biggest things that would really burn are, you know, when you put in that time, effort, and energy on weekends and evenings, and then a client's like, oh, I've decided I'm going to rent. And that is just a killer. You know, a loan officer, it sucks for us, but for the agents, I have a deeper respect for that because it's their time. It's their family time. And yes, it's what puts food on the table, but that person that just made them go around on the weekends and evenings, et cetera, and then decide not to buy, you know, they just wasted their time. So that's the biggest complaint I would have about our business is I wish there was a way, and maybe there is coming with the changes, for them to at least be compensated something for that.
So what are some ways that you've seen realtors stand out and make themselves competitive in this market?
So, you know, some of the ways that agents kind of stand out from each other that I'm seeing now is video content is definitely a huge part of it. I think everybody's been hearing like, you need to do video, you need to do video. But I feel that you need to do both good content and also frequent content. So you have a choice. Like you can either do a lot of content where it's like, that one was good and these other 9 were not so great, or it's like, do good ones, like whether it's once a week or whatever the time frame is. Video is such a huge component right now, but the way agents are standing out these days are just the basics as well. Like how many past clients have you reached out to? How many past client events have you held? Just different ways to stay in front of people, because as it's gotten more competitive, you're really going to need to stand out.
What role does networking play in a realtor's success, in your opinion?
Networking is obviously so important because you have to have all these different connections that you have with people for either it's potential clients you could pick up. So if you worked with this company and then you had somebody in the office that was able to help you get business for the other people around there, that's a networking angle. But honestly, one of the missed opportunities, I think, for agents and anybody else as well, loan officers, you name it, is we get stuck in our rut. It's like, I always use title company X. Well, why do you use title company X? Well, because I've been going there forever. They get stuff done and they do whatever. I would say that if I was an agent, I would make myself a free agent much more often. What I mean by that is like, I would be meeting with different title companies. What can you offer me? I'm loyal to my person, but at the same token, maybe they haven't received any business from them ever, whether it's their loan officer, their title company, their home inspector, you name it. What else can you bring to the table? If you have a home inspector you use all the time, and that home inspector has 20 agents that are sending them business, and you've never gotten a deal, an opportunity from that home inspector, they're either one, giving it to somebody else, or number 2, they're not able to do it. And so I would be using my ability to generate business, rainmake for others, to kind of ask them to help my business out, right? So as an agent, I would definitely be looking to be more of a free agent in some areas.
What's the most innovative strategy you've seen from a realtor on the show?
You know, there's been a number of different agents have kind of given some great ideas and innovative strategy for networking, whether you try to find connections outside the state, definitely when you are interviewing or talking to local businesses on a regular basis, basis. I think that's smart. From the coaching program that I'm in, the core coaching for the real estate agents is they want them to have 40 different business opportunities. So you need to be reaching out to, Joe's Crab Shack manager or wherever else that has employees that they may be looking to buy a house, that you have the potential to help their business and they hopefully can help yours.
Makes sense. So from listening to your show, we've learned a lot regarding the importance of the community involvement and networking, as you're saying here. Can you name some of the best methods you've seen realtors utilize to build and also maintain the relationship with the client?
There's been some great ideas that I've heard, and some of the ones that I was really thinking about earlier. Ben Canty came on the show, and Ben had started a kickball league. I thought that was brilliant. Ben got tired of driving to, I think he said it was in Newport News or somewhere in that area. So he was driving a long way to get to the kickball league, and then he'd have to turn around, stuck on traffic, all that. He's like, why don't I just make my own kickball league? So that's what he did. And guess who's going to be the realtor of choice for the kickball league? Well, the guy that made it. I thought Sarah Hurst gave a great idea, basically building her own Habitat for Humanity group, giving back to the community. I thought that was really smart. I know Michelle Wilson had come on the show and she talked about creating her poker run to raise money for causes. I thought that was really smart. Aaron Ward gave a great idea I hadn't really thought too much about until after her show on trying to find connections in other parts of the country that you can get referrals from and really making that a strong part of her business. Because yeah, it's great if you have an agent in another part of the country that sends you business every now and then, but what if you make that a focal point? I would have 40 realtors in these hot spots where people could be coming from that I want to be the realtor of choice that they would refer to.
Now, you've had a range of realtors of all ages on the show. How have you seen technology impact the industry according to your guests?
That's a good one. I think that everybody, again, is moving towards video. I think impacting the technology has made it so that you have much more out-of-state buyers, or, the buyers aren't going to see the property, so they're doing a lot of Zoom tours, really kind of doing that view. They're going to go look at the house. They're going to give the tour of the house on Zoom or, Facebook. And that's definitely changed because that was not there 10, 15 years ago. One of the best ideas, I think, the idea of just do the video and then send it to the client instead of 20, 30 minutes of having the client on the phone with you as you're looking at the property. Like if you go in the property and you can walk around for 10 minutes or so and really get each detail on the house, I thought that was great because it saves you time. And at the end of the day, if you want to be able to hit more houses, that would be a great way to do it.
That's smart. You can edit the first 3 seconds to be, hey, so-and-so.
Yeah, exactly. So, some of the worries where I think video is going to be going, though, in my own mind, as far as listings, I would almost build websites like that because I love crazy ideas. I feel like I've missed my calling on just coming up with weird, wacky ideas, right? But Kyle, let's say you are an agent and you got this beautiful listing and it's coming live. It's almost like I recently tried to buy tickets off Ticketmaster and it was like at noon, like tickets opened up. Well, what if you had slots where there was a website where people could go, people that are looking at houses, I want to look at this $500,000 house, and they would almost get virtually in line all across the country. And so the agent goes live at noon and I give my video tour. Hey, everybody, my name is Tanner Mulvihill with whoever, and I'm going to show you my beautiful new listing here at 123 Main Street. Reach out to me for information. And you're doing the video live then. You could almost have somebody that's like in the chat box over on the side. So-and-so wants to know how many bedrooms. Oh, well, hey, John, it's 4 bedrooms, 3 bath. And just kind of a unique way where that is recorded. People could watch it later. And I've thought that's maybe kind of a next level where these things go.
Just so you know, I do know how to run live streams. If you ever want to make that idea happen.
We might have something.
Or another podcast idea. Tanner's Crazy Ideas.
You know what? I got a million of them, so I'll be ready.
All right. How do realtors leverage their social media for their business? Because I know it's a big part of it.
I think for agents, I see 2 types. I feel that there's like the post everything crowd that I'm not necessarily sure I'm 100% on board with versus the really well done video crafted crowd. And I am somebody that doesn't necessarily like to put a lot of content out there that might make me look weird, awkward, all that stuff. That's just a self thing. Other people, they don't even think about it, right? But for me, I like to have my video content with my teleprompter. So I have my script written out. I have what I want to say, and that's me. So social media has room for everybody. What's your role? Do you want to be an educator or do you want to be my best friend? Here's my life. And you need to be a little bit of all those things. And that's the role social media has for us. So agents that are really good at social media, it comes down to the video aspect. And that's one of the harder things for new agents agents to crack into, because it's like, I know I have to do video. All right, I'm at an open house today. Come see it. But after like 3 months of not being able to have clients, I can see how that would get discouraging, like another video on your open house. The content on social media, you have to stay on top of it.
So it's almost like a quantity or quality kind of situation.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. So you're either going to go for quality or you're going to go for quantity. I think both can work.
As your editor, I say you've gone for quality. So this question is interesting to me because a lot of these podcasts are like history lessons for me. So moving forward now, how do you feel realtors should stay motivated during slow periods?
One of the things I believe is that motion creates opportunity. And what I mean by that is you may have an idea that you start and it turns out to not be any good. But what if that idea gives you another idea that you can then take and that turns out to be something good? When I first started as a loan officer, I read a book on guerrilla marketing and the idea of, not advertising on billboards, not doing this. And I came up with 20 crazy ideas that I tried to implement as a new loan officer. Everything from I went to Barnes & Noble and I stuck my business card in books on real estate. I went to car dealerships and I talked to the guy selling the cars like, hey man, if anybody ever comes in here and they're trying to buy a car and they need to they have too much debt, I could probably refinance it if they have a house. So keep me in mind. So I said, I'm going to come up with 20 crazy ideas and try to make those happen. And everything's not going to work, obviously. But one of the things in our industry is that a lot of people try the same thing. We have a lot of the same tactics, the same coaches. And if you can think outside the box, that may be what gets you to that level, or at least moves you towards something.
Back at it with the crazy ideas. I like it.
That's right.
All right. So the last one for this segment, how do realtors manage their work-life balance? And let's throw you in that mix too.
The agents that I know most are really hard workers that are really successful. And I think the people that tell you, you can do 20 hours a week and be a successful agent, I'm not sure that's the case. And everybody's level or idea of success is different. But, Kyle, you host a podcast on comic books. So you love comic books. And everybody that knows me knows that I love sports cards. I'm really bad in buying them and investing in them, but I do love them. But with that said, if you love what you do and you have the time, effort, and energy to do it, does it really matter? That's the way I look at it. Like, we've decided that, you shouldn't work over 40 hours a week. Well, why? I'm not talking about you do 100 hours a week, you're stressed out and you never see your kids and any of that. No, I'm talking about, hey, I work 50 plus hours a week, but that's how my wife and I get to go on vacations. And then when we go on vacations, we disconnect. And it could be worse. We could work 40 hours a week and have to drive an hour each way. So did we really get much out of it? Yeah, we had our weekends off, but I guess I just kind of love the flexibility of the job. Now, some people don't like, they're effectively tethered to their phone. And the honest answer about the business is you have to jump when whoever it is says jump, you need to say how high. So for agents, it's clients. And for a loan officer, it's typically agents and or clients. I'm comfortable with that. I like it. I love what the industry does for agents. I mean, I know so many agents who have been successful and probably made more money than they could ever imagine because of this opportunity. And that's what it affords people.
If you like what you do, then it's not work. Great response. Another great segment. And with that, we're going to take another break. We'll be right back with Tanner.
Hey everybody, it's Tanner Mulvihill. Some of you may only know me as a podcast host, but did you know I actually own Bayfield Home Loans as well? That's right. Since 2006, I've been exceeding expectations and creating value for my real estate partners. In today's marketplace, you should be counting on your loan officer to help generate referrals, keep you top of mind for your mutual clients, and bringing you new ideas to help you stand out. I'm going to share with you a very simple question you need to ask yourself. Did you get a new client from your loan officer in 2023? If the answer is no, they either lack the ability to help your business or sent them to someone else. Either way, it's time to take a fresh look at your business and ask yourself, what do I have to lose by giving Tanner a call? You know the answer. Give me a call at 540-850-6267. Let's get together. Talk to you soon.
Tanner Mulvihill, NMLS number 276814.
Welcome back, everyone. In this segment, we're going to reflect. We might sing a song. We might read some poetry. I might put Tanner on the spot. We'll see what happens. But first, Tanner likes to ask the best advice realtors have received that they've used in their careers. But let's switch it now. what's the best piece of advice you've received from a guest?
I've received a lot of great advice from guests, but I think one that really stood out to me that I put in practice as much as possible is Lisa Nelson said in the first 5 minutes of meeting anybody, they need to know that the person is a realtor and I need to tell them I'm a loan officer. However you slip that in, that you're a real estate agent, I thought that was great. And if you make a habit of it, that's really helpful. I would piggyback on what she said though, and a personal experience recently. Carry business cards in your pocket. All times, be ready to go. And I had an experience recently where I was attending a retirement ceremony for a friend and a past client, 37 years in the Navy. And there was a couple sailors sitting behind me. And we're in a loud environment where we were getting ready to start the ceremony, but you could hear the person talking about an earnest money deposit. And he had questions on loan stuff, basically. And it wasn't like I could turn around and have a 10-minute conversation. But if I had my business card, I would have been like, hey man, hit me up. I specialize in VA loans. I did not have my business card on me. Party foul. So agents, first 5 minutes, they need to know that you're a real estate agent. Make sure you have your card on you. You know, in that situation, it wasn't like a perfect time where I could turn around and be like, hey man, scan my QR code, right? Where I could have turned around and said, hey, just a heads up, I specialize in VA loans. Shoot me a text and I'll tell you more about it.
What's the most rewarding part of hosting Virginia's for Realtors? What do you enjoy most about interviewing realtors and so on?
I love the aspect of real estate. I love the sales aspect of real estate. I love how did you get a client? I think almost everybody I know in the business enjoys helping people. We do run into clients that make our job a little bit more stressful. We all have them over time. But for the most part, we are friendly people who enjoy helping others accomplish a goal, and we get satisfaction from that. Hosting the podcast, I get to learn from these people and I get to hear like, well, how do you do it? How do you do this slightly different? What's your unique kind of wrinkle on it? And then I can incorporate that into what I do on a daily basis. And I hope others do as well. So where else could you have a top agent just spend an hour giving you tips and tactics and ideas? And that's what I really love, because we all pay for those types of things. We go to mastermind sessions where, you know, we have realtors on the stage and they're sharing their different ideas, but to have a top producer, like for an hour, like this is what I do. These were my struggles. Like I'm a real person, right? So, you know, you go to a mastermind session, they're not like, well, hey, let me tell you about my first year where I closed 2 deals and thought I was going to have to go back to, you know, wherever I came from doing stuff. You get the full picture of what they do as agents and their successes over time. And so I love that part of it.
And this question I have next for you actually kind of ties in a little bit, but how has hosting the podcast influenced your own perspective on real estate?
For me, what it's really shown is that, one, I believe in the power of coaching, and every agent can benefit from coaching, I feel, because if you lined up every agent that we've had on the show and they were showing you houses and you worked with them and you had a chance to work with each one of them, like to buy a house, right? I bet you would leave that process 100% like that person was awesome. And then the next person would help you and be like, you know what? That person was awesome. And that would happen with pretty much every realtor that we've had on this show. You would go, wow, that was a great experience. I really enjoyed working with them. They were very knowledgeable. They helped me understand what I was doing, you name it. But what separates the very best from the best is going to be the systems and processes they have in place. And it's not so much when they're working with a client, it's how did I get that client? How did I retain that client? How did I get that client to tell their friends about me? How did I generate new clients? And how do I scale what I do? And that's really what I've learned on the show, is that everybody, for the most part, would be outstanding to work with. It's just kind of that next level of what they've been able to do. So it goes back to how much energy's in the tank, right? Like all those things take time, effort, and energy to put together a system. And the sooner that agents can do that, the more free time that frees up. So then they can go help more clients and then they make more money and the process repeats itself.
All right, so here's a good one for you. How do you stay inspired to keep producing new episodes? Because this is, again, the 100th episode?
That's a good question. How do I stay inspired to do it? I love the interview process, but really the toughest part is kind of getting to that point. Because when I call agents, you know, I've had people do it for me before where they would reach out to the agents and try to get them on the show. So Julia, my outreach manager, has done that for me before, but it's tough. You know, just randomly get a phone call from somebody that says, hey, you want to come on this podcast? And of course, when you don't know the person, you know, your defense mechanisms go up a little bit, and real estate professionals and loan loan officers, we get hit by so many people wanting to sell us things. And that's the tough part and not the fun part of the job, is getting to the interview process. But then once you have the guest on, I've made incredible connections. Not necessarily people that may not ever work with me as a loan officer, but more so like, wow, this person I could reach out to, like, hey man, I got so-and-so's heading your way. Would you be able to help them out? And be like, absolutely. And I would know because I've talked to this person, wow, that's somebody that I would feel comfortable recommending people to. So I love that part of it.
Now, you mentioned earlier that I have a podcast. So my answer to this question would just be don't. But what advice would you give someone who's starting their own podcast?
Establish what your goal is. I think that's important because we see so many podcasts that kind of flame out because they don't really have like, what's the point? What's the goal? Is this more of a vanity project or am I doing it with a purpose? And so if you can establish what the goal is out of the gate, I think that's helpful. Number two, it has to be realistic as far as like what it's going to be. Am I going to talk about real estate, interview local business owners? You have to have your goal in mind. You have to have your ideal target market in mind. And then you have to just kind of understand like you're just not going to see a ton of success right away. I have somebody in my life who wanted to start a cast where they kind of talked about self-defense and military stuff. And, that idea sounded great. And he asked me, well, how many listeners do you get? And I told him, this was like a year and a half ago. And I was like, hey, this is my number. And kind of look on his face was like, wow, that's not that many, right? It's like 200 people or whatever the number was. And it's like, well, those are 200 agents that are listening, that are hearing from other agents how to get better. So it wasn't like my audience is 100,000 people. So you have to understand, is this a vanity project or is this like going to help somebody? Or are you going to have a purpose for your show? If you can come up with that, that can help your podcast.
Makes sense. And I will say your early numbers are still like tenfold to my current numbers. So doing good.
Appreciate it, brother.
What would you say the funniest moment you've experienced has been while recording an episode?
I hate to say it, but I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to give you the worst moment that we've had.
Oh, no.
And it was the worst moment because of me and me alone. So for those that are listening, I recorded probably the first 78, 80 episodes, somewhere around that on Zoom. And then Kyle, as we are on right now, we switched to StreamYard. And StreamYard is great. But the problem with StreamYard, at least from my perspective, was that the record button, you have to hit it like twice, which is ridiculous, Kyle. We should be able to hit record and start recording.
Yep.
And Aaron Garcia, Aaron, if you're listening to this, I just can't thank you enough for your grace and your patience and everything. So those that listened to Aaron Garcia's episode, that was actually the second time that Aaron and I had talked that day. We talked for a good hour and a half and just an amazing show, great tips, you name it. And Aaron was kind enough when I realized that we were actually not recording at the very end to come back on later that evening and do it again. So if you know anybody that's looking in the Charlottesville area, I can tell you that Aaron Garcia is not only an outstanding agent, she's an outstanding human. Give her a shot.
I will say that was an easy edit because it's almost like you guys did it already.
That's right. Yes. She knew the questions and I knew the answers.
So what about a message you would like to share to your listeners to help celebrate this milestone?
I would like to say to the people that have taken the time to listen to this show, that's one thing about me is I am a thankful person. You may say that cocky sometimes, definitely when I was younger, stuff like that. But I am a thankful person in my bones, and the people that took the time to listen to this show, that have taken the time to come on this show, I am truly grateful that they did. And it wouldn't be what it is without the agents, because me talking about real estate, nobody cares, Kyle. But the people that come on, they have something to say, and that's awesome. So for the listeners, thank you so much for just taking the time to listen. And the biggest thing I would say is if you think to yourself, you know what, Tanner, you should ask this, or take the moment to leave a review, that makes a big difference for how our algorithms work. So I would love that and truly appreciate it. But the biggest thing is just like, hey man, I listened to your show and I really like that episode. I love hearing those things. Kind of keeps me motivated to do the next one.
Very well said. So what legacy do you hope your podcast will leave upon the real estate community?
I think it's going to be like a time machine. And the reason I say that is, can you imagine if there had been a podcast 20 years ago when I started in the business and we were talking about, fax machines and like just the different stuff that happened back in the day. I remember we used to give out like CD-ROMs that had calculators for mortgage payments on them. And they were like personalized logo ones. So that was super cool at the time. So I think in 20 years, when agents listen to themselves on the show or they stumble across this 20 years from now, they're just gonna be like, wow, that's what real estate was like back then. And it'll be so different in 20 years, just like it's changed so much from 20 years ago. I would go with a time machine will be my answer there.
I'm kind of surprised there's not more like copycats that you've noticed? Just like throwing a different state in the mix and trying to mimic it exactly, because it is a very, very good idea. It's been executed so well too. I'm surprised you haven't been ripped off.
I know that there have been others that have tried, but it just goes back to the same, like we talked about, how do you get people to come on the show? And I think the folks that took the time to come on the show in the early stages when I didn't know any clue what I was doing, I'm truly grateful for that. In fact, Kyle, I can announce that Chris Ognick, who was the original guest numero uno, is going to make a return appearance. And still my favorite joke I've ever made on the show, Kyle, when I interviewed Chris Ognick, Naval Academy Chris Ognick, and I asked him, what's the matter? You couldn't get into a state school? That was still my favorite one, Kyle.
You have to do it again.
I will, just for old time's sake. Yes. So I'm looking forward to having Chris on. And obviously we're not going to go over the full back end story, but really kind of checking in hey, man, 2 years later, what's been happening in the market? Where do you think we're going from here? So it'll be a different conversation.
That's going to be interesting. I'm excited for that one. So what's your vision for the next 100 episodes? Maybe some future projects or ideas? I know at number 200, I expect to be back on again.
Yes, indeed. For the next 100 episodes, I'm actually just looking for great ideas from people. I've thought about kind of doing some quick hit questions. I think some scenarios would be interesting. I'd get people's answers. So, Kyle, you've listened to 100 shows. I'm thinking, I asked an agent, hey, I could give you a listing for $1 million or 3 buyers for 300,000 or 350, whatever. Which would you rather have? And the listing is going to be difficult to sell. And then maybe they go, well, I'd use the listing because I would get this or this. So it's almost like there's no wrong answer, but I want to hear what yours is, right? So that would be an interesting question to ask. But I think if anything, kind of go with quick hit ideas, best book you've read, things that they may be into.
I like that. That's good. So we're at that time. Not only your favorite question is my favorite question, it is the listener's favorite question. Let's close this out. Tell me a scary, funny, or weird story, anything related to the industry, that if you were being interviewed on a podcast, this is the story that you would tell.
I appreciate your question. And as you can imagine, I've done some thinking on this because as somebody who has asked this a number of times from agents to come up with their best story, I had to have a good answer for, the 100th episode. And having been in the business almost 20 years, I better have a good story. So I'm not really even sure what we would label this, but I had a buyer, and I think most agents can relate to a buyer having buyer's remorse. And typically the buyer's remorse is after they've bought the house and they're like, oh, it's not as nice as I thought, or it's oh, we're under contract, but this better house has popped up on the market, so we would rather have that one. But that's typically what we see in buyer's remorse. Now, I had this client purchasing his first home, and I don't think he was super excited about buying a house to begin with. It was really more that his wife was driving the bus on this. We're going to buy a house. We're not going to rent the rest of our life. We're going to be buying a house. And so he was going along to get along, and they're looking at properties, and then they find a house and they go under contract. And the key to note about this was this house was owned by the listing agent. It had been a flip. Listing agent was selling the house, and, they're going to move on with the money and do what they need to do. So, hey, we got this great buyer. He knows the buyer's agent. He knows who I am. So this is going to be great. We'll close, no problem. So this wasn't my easiest loan that I've ever done. Client wasn't super forthright in getting us the documents that we needed. He was also credit challenged a little bit, stuff like that. But we made it through. And closing was supposed to take place on a Friday, and we had gotten the clear to close. I think it was Tuesday, so we're all looking good, ready to go to settlement. And I start hearing rumblings that he's thinking about not buying the house. And I'm going, well, how do you not buy the house, right? You're going to lose your earnest money deposit, things like that. And that is relayed to him. And keep in mind, we're closing on Friday. So now on Wednesday, he's telling people I'm not buying this house. Thursday rolls around. He's adamant he's not buying this house. And now the listing agent has been informed and also informed the buyer that if he does not buy this house, there will be legal consequences, not just up into the earnest money deposit, but he is going to take other action as well. So that has been relayed to the buyer. The buyer then decides to up the ante a little bit and decides to check himself into a mental institution. Basically, I guess to say that he was crazy and shouldn't have to buy this house. That was going to be his defense. I'm just going to check into this mental institution. So over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, his wife goes and visits him in the mental institution, and she informs him that basically, if you don't buy this house and move forward with being an adult, I'm going to leave you and I'm going to take our kids. So he finally comes to his senses and he's like, fine, I'll buy this house. But the listing agent at this point doesn't believe this is actually going to happen. So he says, I want a text. I want a signed document. I want proof that this guy understands we're not playing this game again, either buying this house or we're going to have some legal repercussions. I believe he either signed a document or he sent a text or something that indicated he's moving forward. So now we are to Monday and we're going to close. I think we're closing Tuesday, if I remember correctly. So Monday goes by. Everything's the way it's supposed to be. They're going to do the walkthrough Tuesday morning. So they go to do the walkthrough. You know how most of the time during a walkthrough, the people actually walk through the house, especially if they're at the house, they walk through the house. That's why it's called that. Well, he decided that he was not going to partake in the walkthrough. He decided to stay in the driveway and stare at the house, fuming as he's looking at the house. And the wife is doing the walkthrough with the kids, and he is having no part of the walkthrough. So now it's time to go to settlement. And so they go to settlement. They make the drive to settlement. And apparently, you know how normally settlements are conducted indoors at title companies. He decides that he's just going to stay in his car. And at some point, the settlement agent comes out and is like, okay, I see you. Where's the buyer? And they say, hey, the buyer's in the car. So she has to go out to the car to explain to this gentleman, no, we're not bringing the documents to you. This is not a Wendy's. Please come inside so we can sign those documents. So he finally goes in and signs the documents and they close on the house. But I don't believe there were the after action photos, you know, the Facebook photos that we all like to take of a successful, happy settlement. I don't really think that was the mood of the room for that one. So it finally got done, but that is probably my craziest story about a buyer who decided he was going to get out of buying a house and he didn't have any other options but to check himself into a mental institution. And that's my best story.
That was not the story I was expecting. That was a good choice. That was definitely under the crazy category. And with that, great place to call it. Tanner, why don't you close us out with a final statement on your journey?
The journey has been a great ride. I've enjoyed it. There's been tremendous ups. There's been tremendous downs, but I can't imagine doing anything else. And I'm so lucky that I stumbled into this. I'm so grateful to have you as my podcast editor. I'm so grateful for every agent out there who's given me an opportunity to earn their business and help their clients over the years. And without them, man, I don't have what I have. So just so much gratitude.
Thank you, Tanner, for having me for 100 episodes. Fantastic podcast you have. From what I've learned about you, fantastic businessman, boss, leader, all of the above. So keep going, keep doing it. And that is the 100th episode of Virginia's for Realtors.
Thank you, Kyle. On to the next 100. Well, that's it for this episode of the Virginia's for Realtors podcast. If you're a realtor looking for a loan officer you can count on to follow up with the leads you send, keep you updated on the transaction every step of the way, and get you to the closing table on time, give me a call. I'd love the opportunity to sit down with you for coffee to learn more about your business and how we can make it even better. Until next time, this is Tanner Mulvihill on the Virginia is for Realtors podcast.